Hey everyone, this is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series where I get a chit-chat with other writers. Before we get to today's guest, just a reminder that if you want to hop on over to unboundwriter.com, you can check out my offerings there for writing retreats and speaking events, as well as one-on-one writing coaching and self-guided online writing courses. So all those good offerings if you're either an aspiring or established author looking to take it to the next level. All right, so let's talk about today's guest. Today's guest was Libby Cudmore. So Libby is a Shamus and Black Orchid award winner and the author of the acclaimed novel The Big Rewind. She's been writing for quite some time, and her most recent release, which just came out, is Negative Girl, which you'll see here has just a gorgeous cover to it as well. We had a fantastic conversation. So Libby is from upstate New York, and her writerly aspirations began when she was in fifth grade, when she just literally had a dream about being a novelist, and that has always stuck with her, and she kind of pursued the arts and specifically writing in college, and worked as a journalist for 11 years and has kind of transitioned over to not becoming a full-time novelist, but having her work as a writer become a much more pronounced role in her life. So we talked a lot about, what happens when a book comes out, doing book tours and getting support for that. And also what does a publisher do for you? And in her case, they actually hired an outside PR firm, which is amazing, to supplement their own PR efforts with the book release. And we just talked a lot about writerly habits, like what has to be in your mind as you're writing. How do you find out what works for you? How much a part of the writing community do you need to be? So really good info in here, and we wrapped it all up with a beautiful demonic-esque short story that we made up based on a sentence from Clare Mackintosh's A Game of Lies. So good stuff in this one, folks. You're going to like this. This is my conversation with Libby Cudmore. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. So you're in upstate New York, right?
Currently, I'm actually in New Jersey on my book tour. I'm located in upstate New York normally, but yeah, first week is almost complete.
Nice. Where in upstate New York do you live?
Out by Cooperstown.
Okay. I went to school up in Ithaca, so I know, and my sister lives there now and everything, so I know that section of the state a little bit.
We were just in Ithaca, and I went to school in Binghamton, so.
Oh, okay, yeah, so real close. Yep. Fun memories. So, book tour. So let's talk about book tours a little bit, because we don't talk about that much on this podcast. But they're weird things, right? They're a mixture of like, okay, is anyone going to show up? Does anyone care? Do I have to pay my own way?
Yeah.
And there's always this angst, but it's also exciting because you show up and people are there who want to listen to you talk about your book. So how has it been for your recent release?
It's been great. And part of it is, this is one that, Datura is supporting, but not necessarily sponsoring. But what's been great is that so many friends have come out to help me sort of put it together. My friend Liz has put together a reading for me in Houston. My friends Chris and Terry helped me put together a reading at Jackson Red Bank. My friend Ken got me a panel in Montclair. And so it's been this wonderful opportunity to visit friends that I haven't gotten to see. I'm going back to my home state, which is Oklahoma, for a reading and to see family there. So it's been a good opportunity to see friends and family. And then friends have turned out for these readings, and I've gotten to meet people. I've gotten to meet a couple people from my social media. For the first time, I've gotten to see old
students. Where they tell you their handle, and they're like, "Oh, I'm like Jen Loves Books on Instagram." I'm like, oh, "Okay, now I know who you are."
Yeah, exactly. So like that's been really exciting, like getting to meet people in person.
Yeah, totally. No, it's it's an ego boost, but it can also be an ego deflation depending on, after a while you're like, okay, I need to rely on more people than just my friends and family coming out, but then that's can be tough. And so you just never know what you're going to get. And then on top of it all, you have to learn to be comfortable, obviously, in front of people, which not every author is. Where are you on that scale?
I love talking to people. I love meeting people. I was a journalist for 11 years, so I have to be comfortable with talking to people.
Right.
But yeah, it's the whole thing has been great. I have no complaints.
Oh, good. So did you grow up in upstate New York or no, Oklahoma? You said
no. My family relocated back to upstate New York, which is where my dad is from.
Okay.
When I was little, so grew up in upstate New York. Spent time in Oklahoma, but not my whole childhood.
Yeah, and now obviously you said you were a journalist for 11 years, but when you were growing up, was writing a thing for you? Was it something you definitely wanted to pursue, or was it more like the idea of journalism, the idea of newspapers, magazines, media?
No, I always wanted to be a novelist, and sort of fell into journalism. My husband had been doing some freelance photography for the hometown Oneonta Freeman's Journal, which is a newspaper that I used to work for, and the editor asked, "Do you know anyone? Do you know any writers?" And he said, "Well, my girlfriend, then, she's a writer." And so it was one of those, I got a couple freelance assignments, and before I knew it, 11 years had passed, and I was moving on to the next stage in my career. So it was crazy when I was like, oh, I found other work. I'm going to be retiring at the end of the year, and realizing that 11 years had gone by.
Yeah, that's most people in their careers, because most people study something, then they do something completely different. And they're like, this is a temporary, I'll do this for a year just to pay my rent. And then 11, 15 years go by. But in your case, it sounds like, it was 11 years where fruitful years where you obviously honed your skills and learned journalistic tactics, which are a huge boon to becoming a novelist. But I'm curious about that throwaway phrase, "I always wanted to be a novelist." Do you remember like that inflection point of like, oh, when I read this author when I was 12, that was the bug, or the teacher that said I'm a good writer, that was the thing?
5th grade. And this is one of my favorite stories to tell. I had a dream that I had written a book, and that was it. I got a pink notebook out.
That's such a geeky writing. Dream for a kid to have.
It really is. But it was one that I really stuck with. It was one of those things, as I got to high school, my other passion at that point was theater and costuming. And I thought about going into that. I did some auditions and didn't realize that I didn't like that part. I love performing, but I don't love the audition process. Mm-hmm. I don't really even love the rehearsal process all that much. so it's just you kind of have to do it. Right. So I realized theater probably wasn't for me.
So you were always kind of an arts leaning youth.
Absolutely. I was a goth girl, so I definitely had like the outfits and
right
cosplay, stuff like that.
Scratching Smith's lyrics into your ankle and not quite that bad.
No, writing them on notebooks too. Definitely threw myself across my bed dramatically.
Yeah, of course. But that's the whole dream thing is interesting because, again, a bit of a throwaway comment in a way, but it's huge. It kind of directed you only because you seem to have had the curiosity to follow it. And I always think that's fascinating because I fell into writing myself in my 30s, having no aspirations, and it just started one day. But it took me having to go through it and then look back and really think about why this happened, and be curious about it, because it's so easy for somebody to have a dream or have, something happen to them that might steer them in a path, but it's very easy to dismiss as, of course I have crazy dreams all the time. Like, why would I pay it? but it really does take you, it's the universe kind of poking at you a little bit, saying, hey, listen, this is something here, pay attention to it. Did you feel, I mean, just going back to that dream, did you feel like this was a clarity, even as a fifth grader, as this was a clarity that you hadn't experienced before?
I wouldn't say it wasn't one that I had experienced or hadn't experienced before. I mean, my dad is a writer.
Okay, so it was in the family.
He's a journalist and a nonfiction writer, local history, specifically around caves and Howe Caverns, which you're in upstate, or you were in upstate. You probably heard about Howe Caverns. But so it was one of those things that seemed very normal to me to be a writer, because that was what my dad did.
Right.
And so it was just, one more thing that could kind of clarify.
Totally. Yeah, because to a lot of kids, and I've had several podcast guests who have kind of had this sentiment, they look at books as kids and they don't think about the idea that there was a person behind that book who actually sat and wrote it. Yeah, to them, books were just things that were there. And then the idea of like, oh, you could do this for a living was just this complete, pardon the pun, novel concept. But then they quickly learn that you can do it and you get paid nothing. So reality slowly sets in after a while. So what did you study in school then?
I did study English creative writing at Binghamton University. And I attended all like the teen writers conferences and everything, pen in hand. A whole bunch of different ones. And I'm actually still friends with people from those, which is really exciting. But yeah, I majored in creative writing, or English concentration with. And
throughout your career, first as a journalist and then penning novels, do you flash back to that time at Binghamton thinking like, oh, this really helped me now that I learned this? Or was it just helped you kind of have this permanent mindset of being a writer?
Well, specifically, my creative writing classes really didn't do much for me, if I'm being honest.
Like, expand on that a little bit. Like, it just felt like you weren't learning, like you weren't finding your voice through those classes. Yeah,
and I definitely had a teacher who's like, "You're never going to amount to anything."
That's never helpful.
Yeah, but so the creative writing workshops. I mean, I made some friends in them, and that's always really important. But I look back on my time at Binghamton as profoundly life-changing, because I took Arthurian literature with a professor, Michael Sharp. And we read Le Morte d'Arthur, but we also read Lancelot, and we finished the class by reading Raymond Chandler's The Long Goodbye. And
in Arthurian literature, that's interesting.
Yeah, and the I had never read anything like that before. And I'd watched SVU, like I knew about mysteries, but I had never read something like that, like something beautiful and profound and
dark.
I read it in one sitting. And I've been trying to dabble in fantasy. I've been trying to dabble in like some sort of contemporary sci-fi, and just wasn't finding my place, wasn't finding like what I really wanted to write. And that's when I was like, this is what I want to write. And I was a young woman in kind of the second golden age of crime fiction. So, movies like Sin City and Inside Man were out.
Right.
And so I was surrounded by all this wonderful contemporary Clive Owen starring mystery and crime.
Right.
And that was just such a really exciting place to be in. I was getting into Tom Waits. Like it that time, specifically like 2004 to 2005, was life-changing. That really set me on the path to being a novelist more than any creative writing class I've ever taken.
Yeah, and that's fascinating. And I don't disparage creative writing classes or MFAs or anything. I think they can be very helpful. I think sometimes it can.
They can be in theory.
Yeah, I think sometimes novelists or aspiring novelists cling to learning as a means to not do, and they just get into this like cycle of just like, oh, if I just learned a little bit more, then I'll do it, and it just keeps them from actually writing, because the real experience is in the actual sitting down and writing and going through all that pain, because it takes a long time to figure that out. But I think to your point, when you look at something like Chandler or those movies you're talking about, just the in-your-faceness of them and the darkness and how evocative they are of just an era, I can see you being attracted to that, because it is just, because what ultimately happens is I think you end up, you don't have a voice yet, but you end up seeing like having this relationship, saying like, oh, I think my voice is similar to this, my natural voice, whatever it ends up being. So when you sat down when did you, sorry, too many questions at once. While you were a journalist, were you writing for fun, for sport on the side? Were you playing around with fiction at the time?
Absolutely. I'd written and published several short stories. And then actually on the bus to my job as a journalist, I started what would become my debut novel, The Big Rewind. I actually started it in a notebook. And that's how I wrote every day, like just hour by hour on that bus, drafting. Right. And yeah, that came out while I was working at the newspaper.
Now, and what is that environment like as a journalist working at a paper with other journalists? I mean, my guess would be that more than you were aspiring to do something else with their writing talents. But is there this weird, like, oh, you think you're so cool, you got a novel published now, or you have a story in New York Magazine, or was there any of that?
No, because actually we were a very, very, very small weekly. I was the managing editor and lead reporter. And there was my boss was the only other writer. And so everyone was so supportive and so wonderful.
That's great.
And of course, my husband was the photographer.
Yeah. And what was that leap like from short fiction to long fiction? Did you feel like, you said that what you were writing in your notebook ultimately became your first published novel. Did that start as a short story?
No, I knew that was going to be a novel from the first couple pages. Like, because I wrote the opening scene, and I was like, "Yep, there's a novel in this." And so I wrote both at the same time.
Yeah.
There are some years where I'll sort of focus more on short stories.
Yeah.
Than longer work. But I don't set one aside. It's sort of like, oh, I have this idea for a short story, so I'm going to sit down and write it.
Yeah.
And I'm in a lot of anthologies, or I get, invited to these different calls. And so, then I kind of put things on hold for a few weeks and write a story for that specific call, and then get back to the novel. So I do both simultaneously. Yeah.
And sometimes when you're invited to an anthology, that's nice, because the parameters, it's about vampires in a bowling alley. It has to be something like that. And it's got to be no more than 3,000 words. And you're like, okay. And that's kind of comforting sometimes. Other times you're sitting down, you're like, I just keep thinking about this person and I'm starting to write them. And then the kind of the idea has to tell you, this is a short story, or this has this might have more legs than that. And sometimes that's hard to know.
It really is.
It's funny. Like, I'm writing a novel now that could be a short story, because it basically takes place in one room over the course of 85,000 words. And I'm like, do I have enough here? But I just keep writing.
Yeah.
And you just don't know. Sometimes you just don't know. You're just like, and you get that sense after a while of like, all right, am I forcing stuff to happen because I'm worried that I don't have enough? Or is this organic? And sometimes it takes you 50,000 words to figure it out.
It does.
Figure that out.
It's frustrating, but it's also very rewarding.
Yeah, for sure. So what was that process like writing that debut novel?
That one, unfortunately, spoiled me for how long it takes to write, place with an agent and sell a novel. because I wrote that book in 8 months.
Yeah, that's quick.
Yeah, and I have not been able to replicate that.
Yeah.
So it really, as I was working on my new book, Negative Girl, that took 3 years, and I was just like, I wrote my first book in 8 months. Why is this taking so long? Like, because it takes as long as it takes. Because you got better is
the answer to that question, by the way.
Yeah, and it just takes as long as it's going to take. Some novels come together really easily, some don't, and that's fine. It's all fine.
Yeah, it is. The first thing I wrote took me 3 months, and it was terrible. And I've never written anything that fast again. I mean, 8 to 9 months, then it went to a year to 16 months, and now it's back down to about 8 to 9 months because I've just gotten stronger and my muscles stronger, and I've just gotten better over 20 years. But yeah, so just because it's fast doesn't mean it's right, unless it's just that perfect story that flows out of you. But I don't know if you outline or not, but I don't. So I don't. That's part of the struggle. It's just like, now what happens?
Yeah. And having to, to sit down and explore and, figure out who the characters are and what they're about. And that can be really fun, but it can also be extremely tedious at times.
Yeah, it can be tedious, and you can get stuck in the trap of second guessing yourself, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're not outlining, if you have a really solid outline and you're totally, if you think it's the perfect outline, I can't imagine how good that must feel, because you're like, all right, then the writing is easy because I know what's going to happen. But as a pantser, you've got to constantly be making decisions, and some of those decisions are going to go down a wrong path. And here there's going to be a 5,000 word section. I know I just have to delete, and that affects the rest of the book. And that can freeze you sometimes, because I think it's easy to sometimes second guess yourself or go against what your instinct is telling you to play it safe. And that can turn into a very two-dimensional work, I think.
Yeah, and part of how I mitigate that is I do a lot of writing by hand, so that there's never
Which I can't imagine.
delete.
Right, right.
And as such, I can always go back to it. I can always mine from it. I can always turn it into something else.
Right.
Which has come in handy.
So are you drafting? Is that first draft all longhand?
I usually get about halfway through the book, or until I feel comfortable enough that I've got like sort of a skeleton for the book, before I take it to the laptop. But then I'll occasionally, like if I'm struggling with a scene, I'll return to the notebook. So it's not linear. It's not chapter 1, chapter 2. It's scenes. It's usually I'll do an opening scene, and then I'll do a couple others sort of around, until I get a sense of where the book is going.
Okay. So that halfway through, the half of the book is literally the first half, but it's not fully written as the first half of the book. It's written as almost a hybrid of outlining and narrative. Yeah,
just kind of figuring my way through it, seeing where I want the characters to be. It's almost like opening moves in chess. Like I'm just kind of positioning everyone.
Right. Yeah, because ultimately you have to sit back and look at the landscape and say, does this work as a story? Does this make sense? Do I like it? Am I having fun writing this?
That's a big one. That's a big one.
It's probably the most important one. Yeah, because I think, I've interviewed some people who like very much like, I'm thinking about the market when I'm writing. And I don't relate to that, because I think if I'm not writing what is organically coming to me, I don't have joy.
Yeah,
and writing is so hard that if you're not enjoying it, like I can't imagine you would never get anything done. But
yeah, no, I'm the same way, and I treat it with respect as a job, and so I show up for it. I don't, I show up every day, right? I do the work. But I'm not constantly like looking like, oh my God, what's selling? What's the new trend? I got to jump on something. I have to be a trendsetter. I'm going to write what I enjoy. And so far, I've been very lucky in finding a place for it. And of course, that comes with the caveat that, a 600,000 word mystery epic probably is not going to find a publisher. So you keep it in you keep it within certain parameters, like what's the average length for this type of book.
Right. I mean, you just know.
There is tempering expectations, but.
Yeah, you're not, because you've had decades of your subconscious receiving information about stories, through reading and viewing. So you kind of know, like, what it does for me, at least, it forces me out of, like, you start realizing, all right, this is pretty tropey, whatever I'm writing, this chapter. Mm-hmm. And I only know that because I've seen all the tropes. And so now I want to say, like, okay, now I'm going to push back against that. Not because I'm thinking about the market. I just don't want to be tropey.
So I'm not interested in writing that story.
Right. And your agent's going to tell you, don't, like, why did you send me 600,000 words? What am I supposed to do with this? You know, the right answer is more like 90,000 words.
Exactly.
But it, like you said, it's work. You treat it like a job. You show up every day. I preach 7 days a week, 1 hour a day, because you can be highly productive. So it is a job.
Yeah.
But why would you do a job that you hate?
Exactly.
And there are days that it sucks, days that it feels like data entry, and like any job. But most of the days should be enjoyable. Otherwise, it's probably not for you.
I absolutely agree. You do this because it's not like the quick way to riches. You have to do it for the love of it.
For a lot of people, it's not any way to riches. Mm-hmm. But that's that's the reality too. And the other thing that I get very fascinated by the writer's psychology, I guess maybe because I've gone through all of that, coming from somebody who had no aspirations to write. So just like this kid just figuring out, like, what is this industry? And then you start to realize, like, there are people who write because they think it's going to make them money, or they write until they get a rejection and they can't handle that, which there's nothing of this industry if not rejection. Yeah. And that rejection is there to guide you and to make you better. And some people just can't handle it. But so it's always fascinating to me to see what stops people.
Yeah. I hesitate to say, like, rejection makes you better. Like, sometimes rejection is just rejection. Sometimes the intern who read your cover letter was just really hungover that day, and just it's not personal. It's not, you have to just persevere. You have to realize that it's probably not anything personal.
Right.
And to me, that's almost comforting in a way.
Mm-hmm, totally. It should be. And I think it is helpful in the sense that as a human being, you learn to be like, all right, yeah, not everything is great, and that's okay. And there's only so much I can control. So let me focus on that and not the things I can't control. When you think about your agent shopping your book out and you're getting editorial rejections, a lot of the time it's like, we love this. The writing is fantastic. It's just not for us right now. And it's a market-based decision you have zero control over, but at least they're not telling you your writing sucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I used to collect those rejection letters, back when my first book sold, we were getting letters, and I would collect them all, and then I would sit down and read them all. I'm like, what's the thread in here? So when I go to write the next book, hopefully I've learned something. So, but you got to swallow a lot of ego.
You do. And I always accept rejection letters with a certain level of cheer.
Yeah.
I'm not happy to receive them, but I'm at the stage in my career where a lot of them are personalized. We really liked your writing. Like, she's very talented. We'd like to see another book. And I take that for what it's going to be. It's just like, okay, well, then we'll send them another book, and we'll just move on to the next one. The ones that I get frustrated when we don't hear anything.
Right.
Those are the ones I'm not going to get mad because you didn't like my book. I'm going to get mad because you didn't give me the common courtesy of saying no, thank you. Right.
Yeah. And that's not to say that, even when you get a rejection, like, it's all, good at it. It sucks. It stings. And, that might have been a particular publisher that you really wanted.
Yeah.
And then, that's a whole thing too, because you learn over time, like, you could have been unhappy with that publisher or whatever. You find out that publisher does no support for PR marketing or whatever it is.
Yeah. It's just one of those things where it's just part of what we do. You can't personalize it. I really do live my life by the Roadhouse rules of order. So I always hear Patrick Swayze saying it's not personal.
Right. Totally. And it's what's hard to do, which I try to remind myself to do, is to step back and have gratitude for what you have done. Yeah. Because you start to realize what's easy to get into is I just published this book, very small print run. There was not much support, but in marketing. So it didn't sell great. And so it's easy to go down that path and not to say, holy shit, my book got published by a publisher, which 1%, if you're lucky, has that. And maybe the money's not great, but I should be happy with that accomplishment and build from there.
Yeah, but because I have a day job that pays me.
Right.
And, that's not to say writing books is a hobby, but I don't ever want my life to depend on my writing books. That's too precarious a line for me to walk on. I'm happy going to my day job and then leaving my day job and coming home and writing.
Right. Totally.
I don't ever want writing to feel like a chore. For me, writing is a place of pleasure, and it's not always fun.
No.
But I write because I love it, not because it owes me anything.
Right. That's a good way of putting it. And I think, so I am now kind of in that world where I don't have that day job. But that's not to say the writing income is amazing. So you start to explore writing adjacent, income streams. Doing retreats, doing teaching, coaching, all that kind of stuff. But you have to start figuring out it as a business and not as a maybe I'll do this once a year, something like that. All right, how do I really do this? And that's great too, because then you get really involved with the community. You really get involved with the writing world and getting to know other authors. And this podcast alone has introduced me to a bunch of people. And all of that is critical. It's hard to just be a solo individual trying to make it in the writing community if you just don't put yourself out there.
Yeah. And I remember I had a professor who, discouraged things like blogging and, I guess this is sort of pre-podcast, because he's like, that takes your words away and it's time away from your writing. And it's but being part of the community is important. And I teach with the writer circle, so I get to mentor other writers the way other writers mentored me.
Right.
I'm active with the Barrel House community because those are writers who write so differently than I do. It's a lot of flash fiction writers, a lot of poets, a lot of these incredible essayists. And so it's a completely different world. And I get to learn from other people's writing. Obviously I'm active with lots of different crime writer groups and that, because being part of those communities is vital.
Right.
You can't be, alone.
Right.
Or the work is going to suffer because you're not engaging in those human connections. So the work isn't going to feel human.
Right. And no, I totally agree. I think that advice from your professor is terrible. And, he
never published a second book. So what did he know?
Well, and the other thing is once you're established, if you get to the place in your life where you can be an established novelist, there's a lot of other shit you got to do. There's social media stuff. There's personal marketing. There's going on podcasts. And so there's a lot of things and the idea that and I know some people who do this, but the idea that otherwise you're sitting there and writing for 8 hours is kind of ludicrous. Very few people I know do that. And if they do that, it's not out of a sense of work ethic. It's a sense of, it's just this, how their brain works. If I wrote more than 2 hours, I can almost guarantee you anything after that would just be horrible because my brain is mush at that point.
Yeah.
So you have time, and you've got to use that time to do all the other things that support your business, don't you think?
And it really is about knowing what's good for you. Your writing time may not work for me.
Totally.
And I think that's important. That's one of the most important things you can do as a writer starting out is figuring out what your schedule is and figuring out what that time looks like for you. And the work of being a writer, as you said, like scheduling appearances and filling out surveys and connecting with other writers and doing the teaching and the podcasting, all of that is part of writing. And so there are days when I can't write. So I'm like, okay, well, I need to get this interview done. So I'll fill out, the interview form that I still need to finish, or I should submit these for awards, or I'll, put 2 more submissions in. And that's all still writing work, and it's important. And so that's a good way of sort of fending off those days where the words just aren't coming, but you can still do the work.
Right. I mean, I think, so, and you're totally right. So when I teach, it's always of the perspective of, hey, here's how I do it. And I think it's good to hear how different people do different things. And to your point, see what lands. And a lot of times it's just you experimenting to see what feels the most right.
And it changes throughout your life. What may have worked, before you had kids or changed jobs or anything like that.
100%.
So it's about being flexible.
Yep. So I'm an hour a day, and you think that's very achievable, and it is very achievable. But sometimes that hour is the first half hour is me sitting there.
Oh God, I've been there.
And thinking, but that is productive in its own way. If my, my kind of soft goal is 500 words a day, unless I'm editing, but if I only hit 250 because it took me half an hour to think, that thinking was productive. I don't want to get down on myself and say because I know another day I'll write 750 or 1,000 or whatever it is. Exactly. It all evens out over time. But it is good to have a schedule and to figure that out, and to just to do it. That's the hardest thing. Like that's what most aspiring writers don't get is like they're sitting there like, oh, now I'm inspired, so I'm going to go write for 3 hours, and then I'm not going to write for 3 more weeks.
Yeah, no, it's the butt in the chair. It's the little rituals. I always put on a record.
Yep. I listen to thunderstorm sounds.
Nice.
I can't have any words. I can't have anything with lyrics because that's too distracting, but it's got to be an ambient. I have one loop that's like a thunderstorm in the desert. I don't know why that makes a difference.
Oh, that's cool.
Somehow it's like it works for me. And I like to be in a coffee shop. I like to be surrounded by human energy, put my headphones on and tune everybody out. But somehow that's my ritual.
Yeah, nice.
And so was the release of this book, Negative Girl, does it feel different to you than previous releases, or is it going how you want it to go?
It feels much different. And again, because I'm no longer a debut author, I sort of know the ropes.
Right.
I've got such a supportive team at Datura and at K Publicity.
Yeah, K is great.
It's just felt so good. It's, as I said, it's going great. And I'm meeting so many wonderful people, and people are enjoying the book, which is the most important thing. It's
do you look at your reviews?
Not really.
Yeah, I look at like the first, like before it comes out, and then like the first month of when it comes out, just to understand the data of it, of like, okay, most people like it, or a lot of people have problems with the ending. Okay, I don't know, that's information. But I don't go down rabbit holes because there's nothing to be accomplished with that.
Yeah. People have come up to me and told me they love it, and I'm just going to go with that.
Yeah.
It's one of those things, like the people who are important to me and whose opinions I value are telling me they love it.
Right.
And so I'm happy to hear that.
And not only do you have an agent, but you have a publisher. So it went through the most stringent rounds of acceptance because it's really hard to get an agent and to then sell a book. So it has to be a certain level of great to make it that far. So you have the confidence of knowing like, yeah, it's not for everyone. Not everyone's going to love it. But, you know, people risked themselves, their companies financially to get this out in the world.
Exactly. And so, you know, I try not to lose sight of that.
Oh, good.
And I have to do my part. And I think a lot of, you know, aspiring writers think, you know, you turn in the book and it's all over. It's like, no, I got to do my part, which means I have to get out on the road. I've got to tell people about the book. I have to, you know, I get to do all the, really, it's fun stuff. This is not a grind for me. I've loved being on podcasts and talking about the book and meeting all these different podcasters and seeing everyone's cool bookcases and stuff in the background. I'm loving yours.
Well, you did a major thing by hiring K Publicity or any, you know, marketing PR firm, which is not to be, because so I've used K for probably my last 6 or 7 books. That's a big deal. It's you're investing a lot of money, of your own money to give your book the best fighting chance it can. And I don't think people understand like what a big deal that is. So obviously you've had a good experience with that.
Yes. And that was Datura. Again, investing in my book and Kay agreeing to take it on, which is,
oh, so Datura like hired Kay? Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. So do they not have their own in-house?
They have their own in-house for the UK, but this is for American support.
Yeah, well, that's great because
I know
it's not cheap.
No, and it was just again made me feel really valued as an author. I'm absolutely loving Datura. I'm having such a good experience with them, and it's one of those things like I just want to recruit other people. Like, send your book to Datura. They're so great as publishers, and they've been really thoughtful and fun to work with. I got that incredible cover.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It is very cool.
Yeah, and I got an audiobook deal. We've got Jay Carnes from The Shield. You want to talk about the golden age of crime fiction, The Shield. Yeah. He's reading for Martin Wade, who's the main detective. On the audiobook, I read for Ellery Jacks. So they've really worked so well with me, and it's been such a wonderful experience. I couldn't be happier.
That's awesome. Well, Libby, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to do the storytelling part of the show, the making it up portion. I've chosen 3 books somewhat randomly. These are all 2024 releases. You're going to choose one of the books, and we're going to pick a random sentence from a random page. I'm going to read that sentence, and that'll be the first sentence in maybe a 2 to 3 minute long short story. So very short. We're just going to alternate back and forth. So I'm going to read the sentence, and then you give me the next sentence or 2, whatever comes to your mind that happens next. Then I'll do a sentence or 2, and then when it completely goes off the rails, I'll
what kill fun!
It's a good brainstorming exercise. So I've got all thrillers. I've got Clare Mackintosh's A Game of Lies. Shelley Costa's The Damages. And Joanna Schaffhausen's All the Way Gone. So choose one of those.
Let's go with the first one.
Clare, a lovely, lovely, lovely person. Give me a page between 1 and 350.
251.
All right. I'm going to quickly scan page 251, see if I can find a sentence that might work out for us. Let's see. There's a lot here, so I'm trying to think what would... all right. So it's 2 sentences. Very brief. I'm just going to read them and then do whatever you want with it, or if you want me to go first, whatever you want to do. Here we go. Lucas breathes out. It's frightening how quickly the old ways have come back to him.
Lucas breathes out. It's frightening how quickly the old ways have come back to him. The old gods, the old rituals, the feeling he got when he opened the book, so familiar, and yet something he wanted to hide away.
He swore to himself, 10, 15 years ago? He would never do this again. But the circumstances in his life right now dictated this is exactly where he has to be, regardless of what was about to happen in the next 5 minutes.
How quickly could he summon the old gods? How quickly could he assemble the altar to light the candle? Could he even find a candle? An old Bath and Body Works candle. Would that be enough? Would that be too crude or too silly? Or would it even work? There was only one way to find out.
He was trying not to be distracted by the muffled groans of the young man sitting in front of him, tied to a chair, gagged with an old handkerchief. The man didn't know that Lucas was really trying to help him, truly, although he was sure it didn't look like that from his perspective. He started chanting in Latin, knowing the man would be screaming soon.
The screaming began. Softly at first, words tumbling like rabbits out of a hole in the grass. Then louder, like thunder. None of them made sense, and yet he could translate them. He knew what they meant in their garbled, guttural tones. The demon was trying to escape, trying to hold on, and yet unable to cling much longer to the man.
Oh, I think we call it there. That was great. You're good at this.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, it is fun, right? Because I just love the idea that we have to accept each other's premise, like improv.
Yeah.
You start to think, okay, it's going to go this way, and then the other person says something like, all right, let me grab that and go with it here.
Yeah, I didn't expect the man tied to the chair, so that was really fun.
There's always got to be somebody tied to a chair somewhere. Well, Libby, great to talk to you, and huge congratulations on the release of Negative Girl. I will make sure that in my intros, the video intros, people can see what a beautiful cover it is, because it is indeed fantastic. And I wish you all the success with the book and your tour.
Oh, thank you so much. Looking forward to reading your next one.
Take care. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Take care. All right. Bye-bye.
All right, that is it. That is my conversation with Libby Cudmore. I told you it was going to be a good one, and it was a good one. I really enjoyed my conversation with her. You can find out everything you want to know about her and her books at her website, libbycudmore.com. While you're online, check out carterwilson.com if you want to subscribe to my newsletter, check out my books, check out my appearances, all that good stuff. Or hop on over to unboundwriter.com if you're an aspiring or established writer who's looking to take it to the next level, and you can learn about my retreats, my coaching, and my self-guided online writing courses. All right, friends, that's it. That is it for this episode of Making It Up. Another episode out, as always, next week. In the meantime, take care.